today. Well, how are you guys doing this morning? Good. Well, it is good to be with you here. We just got back from our fall refresh with the teenagers. I'm Pastor Justin. I'm the youth pastor here, and we spent Thursday, Friday, and Saturday up in Fosston, Minnesota, ministering to the kids, having fun, doing some devotionals and doing some services. And the kids got to help clean up the campgrounds a little bit for winter to make sure things are ready, and it was a really good time. We did have, some of you may have heard about this, we did have a really interesting day yesterday on the drive home. It was like 4 o'clock. We were probably an hour away from church, and everything came to a dead stop because they had closed all of 94. From like 4:30 to 11 because there was a hazmat accident with a semi-truck. And so we were stuck in traffic in like a half-mile stretch of road for about an hour and a half with a van full of, there was 11 of us, I think. But it ended up being kind of a good time, right? Oh, you were in the other one. You were in the other group. Yeah, it kind of ended up being a good time. I don't know, the kids got loopy and kind of crazy and hyper. But I think I had the worst attitude out of anybody in the van. So that was kind of a positive for the weekend. But I just wanted to say thank you for letting us minister and love on your students, because it was really special this weekend. Just hearing stories from some of the students saying like, hey, I've been trying to hear God at these events for so long, and I feel like I finally did for the first time in my life. Like, I'll sit through 10 hours of traffic if that's what it takes for that to happen. So just thank you again. And so students, if you were here at the Fall Refresh this weekend with us, I am preaching the same sermon, but a different type of the same sermon. Does that make sense? Because it's in a totally different setting, in a totally different context. So if you're taking notes today, students, and you're like, okay, Pastor Justin, I heard this. I don't want to hear this again. I want you to write down what you noticed differently. Does that make sense? You following me? What's different about it this time compared to what it was last time? So, the topic of our sermon today is, what are you doing here? And we're going to be preaching from the story of Elijah in 1 Kings. And let's just start by thinking about that for a minute. Why did you show up this morning? Did someone make you? Teenagers are laughing a little bit. You don't have a choice, most of you, right? Is there someone that you care about that really wanted you to come this morning, and so you kind of caved in, like, okay, yeah, we'll do it, we'll come. I'll suffer through a morning service at church this morning. Are you hoping, okay, like, I want to encounter God in some way, and this is a place where that might happen, so I'm going to come and seek in some way to see what God might do. Maybe you're just a faithful attender who's like, I'm committed to this church, I'm committed to this community, I'm committed to the people here. This is my home, this is my family. And that's why I show up week to week to week. And maybe you just heard there was this really good-looking bald guy that was going to preach. And if that was you, we'll have a prayer time afterwards because you're going to be disappointed. I'm sorry. But what are you doing here? Why are you here this morning? What are you doing at Bethel Christian Fellowship? So there was a time in Israel's history where they were ruled by an evil king named Ahab. You guys say Ahab? Good job. And his wife, whose name was Jezebel. All right, so Ahab and Jezebel took over control of Israel, and when they came in, there was a shift in the religious structure of the entire nation, all right? So they brought in a god named Baal. Can you guys say Baal? You may have heard it pronounced Baal, but I'm here to correct you. It's Baal. And they brought in another god that we don't talk about as much, and her name was Asherah. Can you guys say Asherah? All right, and when you think of Baal and Asherah, this is the image I want you to have in your head. So Baal is a storm god, all right? He controls the weather. So if it's raining a lot, which you kind of need if you want to live, right? You need rain. The idea is you would pray to Baal because he controls the weather. And Asherah, and I know there are some of our Illuminate students in here, our 6th and 7th graders. Asherah is the goddess of kissing. That's what we're going to go with this morning. Asherah is the goddess of making out and of babies, all right? And this actually matters a lot. If you grow up in an agricultural society, you want your animals to have babies. right? You want your cows to kiss each other. It's really important because if your cows don't kiss, you're not going to have milk next year, right? You're not going to have beef. You can't have taco night anymore. You can't have hides to make clothing out of and all the other byproducts that we get from our animals. And so these gods, to a lot of ancient people, does it make sense why people would want to worship these gods to you, right? Like this isn't, when I was growing up, my worldview was like, there's no other God but the one God. So it seems stupid and silly to me that people would worship these gods. But if you're growing up in a world where you are entirely dependent on water from the sky, please someone send water from the sky. I don't care what we call you. I'll make sacrifices if I have to, but please someone send water. Please someone help my cows have babies, right? Like we need fertility, we need water. And they would go out of their way to appease these gods. And one of the things that Ahab and Jezebel did when they came into power was they said, well, this is what we're doing now. These are the people that we're worshiping. And the Jewish followers of Yahweh, the God of Israel, said, well, that's a problem because we are called to only worship Yahweh. No one else gets our worship, right? We're exclusively tied to him. And so the priests and the prophets of Yahweh resisted this change and this shift in power. And so Ahab and Jezebel said, okay, you're going to die. And so they completely eliminated all of Yahweh's prophets and all of Yahweh's priests. And if you're a person growing up in Israel and you see this happen, right? Like there's a shift in power. You've got Baal and Asherah coming in, and you've got Yahweh kind of leaving. And all of Yahweh's prophets and priests get executed. Who does it look like is the more powerful of the two gods? You're thinking Baal and Asherah are more powerful, right? Like they're the ones. Like if Yahweh was so powerful, why are all of his people dead? You follow me, right? Like and if you're a person that feels kind of torn or unsure, or maybe you're like an intellectual, like, well, let's look at the evidence and decide how we're going to figure this out, right? It looks like Yahweh is kind of weak. And Baal and Asherah, that's where the power is, right? And so there's this major shift. And one person was able to survive this purge of the religious establishment, and his name was Elijah. His name was Elijah. All right, can you guys say Elijah? You guys have heard this name before if you've been around church in any way, shape, or form. Elijah's kind of a big deal. He's famous. And God tells Elijah to go into, okay, let me just pause here. So God tells Elijah to go into the capital city to go speak to Ahab and Jezebel to tell them something. Now, if I'm Elijah and Ahab and Jezebel just killed all the prophets and priests of Yahweh, and then Yahweh says, okay, you're next. It's your turn. Go talk to them. How are you feeling right now? Are you like, yeah, let's do it. This is going to be great. No, you're like, okay, we're going to find out if I really trust God, right? We're going to see if he really is powerful. We're going to see if he's going to protect me. And so God says to Elijah, go tell Ahab and Jezebel that the rain is canceled indefinitely. So, go tell the worshipers of the storm god and the fertility goddess that there will be no more rain until Elijah comes back and tells them again. All right? Do you see what's kind of happening here? So the storm god is supposed to be the one in charge. Yahweh says, okay, storm god, we're going to show you who's the boss, right? Like this is a power struggle between the gods that's happening in this book. And we kind of feel the tension of Jezebel and Elijah, but this is really a tension between Baal and Asherah and Yahweh. And Yahweh comes and says, I'm in charge. And immediately, Elijah tells him the news, and then he's like, peace out, and he runs away. All right? Because, surprise, surprise, they want to kill him. And so Elijah goes into hiding for 3 years of his life during this drought that ravages the nation of Israel. And he's afraid for his life. Because everyone that he knew and did ministry with is dead, except for him. He's alone. The last prophet of Yahweh in a nation that is worshiping Baal and Asherah. Is this a happy period in Elijah's life? No. Okay? This is like, we don't really get much of like Elijah's earlier life, but these are not the glory days of his life. These are the worst years of his life. Are you with me here? The time of his life where he is doing everything that God wants him to do. The time of his life where he gets to be a part of this battle between the gods and he gets to be the mouthpiece of his God are the worst days of his life. He got to stand before the king and say, hey, my God's going to win, while he's trembling in his boots, afraid for his life, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, right? And then there's a drought in the nation of Israel, and he has to go into hiding, and God is providing for him, but they're barely scraping by, all right? God's taking care of them. But Elijah's relationship with God has to be more tense than it's ever been during this period of his life. And then after 3 years, God sends him back to King Ahab and King Jezebel, and he says, okay, we're going to have another showdown. We're going to up the ante a little bit. So this time, I want you to go to Ahab and Jezebel and invite them to have a showdown between Baal, Asherah, and me in front of the entire nation of Israel, and you're going to invite all of the priests and the prophetesses of Baal and Asherah. So Elijah listened. He went back into the mouth of danger, and this is 1 Kings 18. Then Elijah said, now Ahab, summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who are supported by Jezebel. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. And Elijah stood in front of them and said, how much longer will you waver, people of Israel, hobbling between two opinions, two options? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. And I can imagine what it would be like to be in the audience that day, right? To be a person in the nation of Israel and how torn I would feel. Because on one hand, there's been a drought for 3 years, right? Baal and Asherah have not been living up to their end of the deal. The cows have not been kissing because they're all dead, right? There's no water, so my animals are not thriving. There's no new babies coming in, right? I'm glad someone got the laugh there. But this has been like rough. Drought is not fun for the people that are going through it, right? But on the other hand, Yahweh didn't protect his people, right? God let his people die. So who's the God that we should follow? How are we supposed to know? Do you feel the tension that these people are in? And so like being invited to find out who's the real God of Israel, who's really in charge, this would mean everything to a lot of those people. Like, I don't know what to believe, and I want to find out. And it's not just a big deal for them, right? This is a big deal for Elijah as well. He spent 3 years of his life on the run. He's been terrified. He's been scraping by, provided by God. And Jezebel and Ahab have been hunting him relentlessly. There's a reference in a different part of this story where one of the people Elijah is speaking to is like, hey, like every time we think we've got you figured out and we're going to get you, you just disappear. It's like you're teleporting to different parts of the nation. And there's kind of this unspoken story that's been happening of a chase between Ahab, Jezebel, and Elijah, and God's protecting him in all these different ways. But the nature of this showdown is that Baal and Asherah versus Yahweh, and if Yahweh wins, all of the prophets and prophetesses of Ahab and Jezebel get executed because they're false. And if Baal and Asherah win, Elijah, the last prophet of Yahweh, gets executed because he's false. So there's a lot of stakes here, right? This is a really intense, tense moment in the story. And when I was hearing this story growing up, I didn't really feel that because I was like, there's only one God. This isn't that big of a deal, right? Baal and Asherah aren't real. They're nothing to be worried about or anxious about. There is only one God. But to every person present, this question hadn't been answered yet. They didn't know what was true and what wasn't. So, Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of Yahweh who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets, Asherah has 400 prophets, that's 950. Why don't you guys go first? Bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish, cut it up into pieces, lay it on the altar without setting fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood of the altar, but I won't set fire to it either. Then you will call on Baal, you will call on Asherah, I will call on Yahweh. Whoever sets the wood on fire is the true God. And all the people agreed. So, they build their altar. Sorry, I should have skipped to that slide. They build their altar, they're worshiping for hours, praying to Baal, praying to Asherah, asking them to send lightning from heaven, fire from heaven, and nothing happens. And so the day goes on, and it goes into the afternoon, and one of the funniest, when I was a kid, I loved this part of the story so much. One of the best parts of the story is like everyone's getting sick of waiting, and Elijah starts saying, maybe Baal's like, you should keep going, keep trying, keep praying, right? Maybe he's taking a bathroom break. Maybe he can't hear you. Maybe you should be loud enough. And so just this image, I love this image of like, your God he's not in a rush to come take care of you. He's taking his time. But then nothing happens. After most of the day goes by, nothing happens, and it's Elijah's turn. And things get serious. And just like this moment right here, when it's Elijah's time to go to his altar and pray, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like it's beating, it's thumping, it's time. Like if God does not show up in this moment, then the past 3 years of his life have been wasted. All the friends that he's lost to Baal and Asherah, all of the status that he used to have that's been gone because he's been a fugitive on the run. All right, he's this enemy of the state. He's got to have PTSD at this point in his life because of the immensity of the trauma that he's been living through. And it's all coming to a climax because if God shows up in this moment, the last prophet of Yahweh gets to take the nation of Israel back. You feel me? Like he won't have to run anymore. If God shows up, all of the prophets of Baal and Asherah are dead. And Yahweh's running the show again, and he's the last guy left. He gets the status back. He gets to be back on top. He gets to be the mouthpiece of God to the king and the queen of Israel, and all of the suffering that he has gone through will finally be worth it. And he's standing there. And it's not about his ability to perform. It's all about, like, God, if you don't show up, I don't know what's going to happen, right? Like, he's completely dependent on this act of God, and he prayed to Yahweh and said, it's at the usual time of offering for the sacrifice. He walked up to the altar and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that everything I have done has been at your command. Oh, Yahweh, answer me. Answer me so these people will know you, Yahweh, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. And it says, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. You see, Elijah had poured jugs of water onto this altar beforehand just to like rub it in, right? And in the middle of a drought, massive jugs of water are a precious commodity. So I can just imagine, like, what is he doing? He's pouring water on this altar, and then to see it all get burned up in a flash of fire from heaven. And when the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, Yahweh is God. Yes, Yahweh is God. And it's like the tension of uncertainty is broken as lightning from heaven comes down. And Baal, the storm god, couldn't do it, right? But Yahweh, the guy that let all of his prophets and priests die, shows up. And that's got to be confusing, right? Like, how do you figure that out? Like, what does that mean? What's all that about? But, I mean, you can't argue with the evidence. Elijah walks up, prays, and boom, everything starts on fire. So Yahweh is definitely it. He's God. And the tension is broken, not just for Israel, but for Elijah. Like, oh man, it's over. Like, it's done. I don't have to run anymore. I don't have to be afraid for my life because Yahweh, he did it. Holy fire from heaven came down. Like, this is the peak of Elijah's entire service to Yahweh. After everything he's seen, after all the tragedy, finally he doesn't have to be afraid anymore. And the deal goes through. So the false prophets get executed. And Elijah gets to join the king's procession back home to Jezreel. All right? And it's really cool, actually. So Elijah got to run ahead of King Ahab's chariots. Okay, can you imagine you're coming back to the city after a major showdown between the gods, and who's running at the front? It's not the king, it's the prophet. Elijah, the last servant of Yahweh, is running into the city ahead of everyone. Like the message that sends, Elijah, oh dude, like his back is straight. Like he's like looking at people, making eye contact, like you know who I am, right? Like I was the guy that they were hunting for years and years. But Yahweh showed up. And what makes this story so amazing, like what Yahweh, he's brilliant. Because Ahab and Elijah walk in to the palace at Jezreel. And they explain everything that's happened, right? They're like, hey, Jezebel, like this is what happened with the showdown, right? And so Ahab, he gets home, he tells Jezebel everything Elijah's done, including the way he killed all the false prophets of Baal and Asherah. And Elijah's probably present. He ran in ahead of Ahab, right? So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid, and he fled for his life. He goes from I don't have to be afraid anymore to instantly, oh no, it's happening again. Like he had just been on the mountaintop with God. He'd seen Yahweh prove himself in front of everybody, right? Not a shadow of a doubt is in his mind anymore. Yahweh is my God and he is powerful, more than any other. And I don't have to run anymore because he's coming back. Israel is going to serve him again. And immediately, he gets into the palace and he has to go back exactly to the life that he had before. Can you imagine the disappointment that Elijah was feeling? I think some of you can, actually. I think some of you have felt that disappointment. You've had moments with God where it seemed like, okay, the world is more beautiful than it's ever been, right? Like I'm connected with God. I'm feeling God. Like I can see him. And this world, I didn't know it could be so beautiful. I didn't realize that I could see God's fingerprints in the smallest of things. And it felt like I was wrapped in this cocoon of love and I was safe. And then the real world comes and it kicks your door in. And it's like, nope, I'm still here. The world hasn't changed. It's still busted. It's still broken. And the crushing despair that Elijah goes into after this moment. He goes to Beersheba, a town in Judah, leaves his servant, and then he goes alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said, take my life. For I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. And I remember when I was young and I read this, I thought, like, wow, Elijah, what is wrong with you? You just saw God send fire from heaven and the next day you're asking to die. But you know what? Now that I'm older, I get it. He knows God is real, but he is disappointed in God's failure to live up to his expectations. I don't want to serve a God that lets me live this way after everything I've been through, after I've done everything right, God. Everything you asked me, I have suffered and ran in fear. I watched my friends die. I have done everything in service to you. I'm the last one. No one else is serving you. No one else in this entire nation. I watched 900 false prophets fall. And now I'm running again. Like, what is the benefit of serving you, Yahweh? Why can't I have the life I deserve? And I know you guys have felt that. I know you have prayed those prayers. You felt that crushing weight because I've felt that crushing weight of disappointment. Like, isn't Yahweh supposed to give me a better life? It seems like sometimes we just can't escape the darkness of this world, even when we're doing everything right, even when we're leaning into the light as much as possible. So God leads Elijah to a special place. And actually, before we talk about that, God is so good and so gentle with Elijah when he's feeling this. I didn't put this scripture in, but one of the first things that God does after Elijah prays this prayer, "Let me die," he comes to Elijah and gives him a chance to sleep. You're safe right now, take a nap. And then he wakes Elijah up, and God's giving him a meal. Okay, now it's time to eat. Eat a little bit. You need your strength. It's been a rough couple of days, right? Eat. And he lets him take another nap. And then he wakes him up and feeds him again. Come here, eat some more. We're going to go on a trip. And just the gentleness of the way God deals with his disappointed prophet. And the goodness of a God that answers prayer, because when Elijah prays, "God, let me die," Elijah answers his prayer. And he says, "No. Eat, because we're going somewhere right now. I'm not finished with you, Elijah. This story isn't over yet." And I know when some of you have prayed those prayers or asked those words, your disappointment with God, that you're drowning in it, and your hopelessness, I think he said the same answer to a lot of us in different ways, that he's not done with us, that he's still using us. So God led Elijah to Mount Sinai, the place where he made his covenant with Moses hundreds of years before. And the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I believe that this question is the beating heart of what God is asking us this morning. And I don't know where you are at in life. I don't know what's brought you to this moment. Maybe you're running from something and you're seeking God in some way. Maybe you just want an experience with God. Like you're unsure and you're indecisive. Like, "God, I want evidence. Like, give me a reason to serve you." Maybe like you're like Elijah and you've been faithfully serving God for a long time, but it's been a lot of suffering and a lot of disappointments because God hasn't done the things you were hoping that he would do yet. And so maybe you're just holding on for dear life. Like, "God, please do something. Give me a reason to keep holding on to you." And some of you, I know, you've tasted and seen, even through the disappointments, even through the frustrations, God stand resolute. And you're like, "You know what? At this point in my life, I just serve faithfully, trusting and knowing that eventually he'll show up again." Right? Like eventually that he's not finished with my story yet. That even if my story does come to an end in a way I don't want it to, it doesn't mean he's not good. Maybe that's you and you just want other people to see that and experience that. I believe God's asking you that same question this morning. What are you doing here? What is the state of your heart? The Lord said to Elijah, "What are you doing here?" And Elijah replied, "I have zealously served you. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and they're trying to kill me too." And just the disappointment that he is just soaking in this. And he's standing in front of Yahweh, and he's almost arguing, right? He's almost like debating God. Like, "I've seen you do all this stuff, Yahweh. I'm the last one, and look at where it's gotten me." And so what happens in this story is God had to have a showdown with Israel, right? And Baal and Asherah. He had to have this moment where he proved himself to them. But now, what's about to happen is Yahweh is going to have a showdown with his last prophet. And I want you to pay attention when we read this next part of the story. What did God do to prove himself to the nation of Israel? How did he show up? Does anyone just shout it out? He showed up with fire, right? He sent a flash of fire to heaven. And the question that I have for you before we read this next section, where does God reveal himself more? Does he reveal himself more when it is in front of the entire nation and the king and all the false prophets of Baal and Asherah? Or does he reveal himself more when it's just him and his disappointed prophet? "Go out and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after that, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak. He went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God revealed himself more in private to his doubting last prophet than he did to the entire nation of Israel, to the false prophets of Baal and Asherah, before even the king, right? Like, if you're going to reveal yourself to anybody, shouldn't it be the king? But in his tenderness and his goodness and his love for Elijah, he pulls him aside where there is no other witness. He says, "Look, I'm for you, dude. I'm on your side. Look at how powerful I am. I don't want you to forget it. I'm not just the God of the storm clouds. I'm the God of the earth that you stand on. Watch it shake. I'm the God of the wind that blows in the trees. Watch me knock the rocks in this canyon loose with the force of my wind. And yes, I'm the God of the weather. Watch my fire come down from heaven again. And hear my voice as I whisper to you. What are you doing here? Haven't you figured out, after everything, all the suffering and the disappointment, that I'm with you in the suffering? That I'm with you in your disappointment? And in God's goodness, and it doesn't feel like it should be this way, but it is. God used Elijah's disappointment to use Elijah. God chose to let Elijah be disappointed in him in order to further Elijah, because this isn't the end of Elijah's story. After this, God says, I have someone that I want you to go mentor right now, Elijah. After everything you've been through, the next phase of your ministry is to find Elisha and to grow him and shape him and teach him everything that you've learned about following me. And I'm going to pass the mantle that is on your shoulders on to this mentee, this pupil. And I want you to tell him everything. The disappointment, the way that I've revealed myself to you, the miracles and the provision that you've seen take place. And let me tell you, church, Elisha, in the Bible, it records twice as many miracles for Elisha as it does for Elijah. Because Elijah did this job and he took it seriously. He said, I'm going to teach you everything I know. And God used this investment and he doubled it. And it was in this tender moment that he had with Elijah where he wasn't dealing harshly with him, where God wasn't mad at him for his disappointment. God was loving and tender and patient with him. He fed him. He let him rest. And he revealed himself more to this one man than to the entire nation. And I believe this is his modus operandi. This is how he works. We want him to move in the big ways, right? Like to change all these messed up problems in our world. All of the evil that we see that is crushing and disappointing. Like if you've seen the pictures coming out of Israel and Palestine like I have, like you felt that tension that the disappointment that Elijah felt. Like, what are you doing, God? Why haven't you put a stop to this? Why does this cycle of violence keep repeating throughout history over and over again? Like, why haven't you let us figure it out? But he comes in and he whispers to us. And he meets us there. And that's the place that we should look for him. And that's the place I want us to look for him this morning. I could have the worship team up. We're going to just go into a time of reflection and prayer. And I think I want to invite some of you to hear him speak to you this morning. And that might be uncomfortable, right? Just like give God permission to speak to you. But I'm not the still small whisper of God's voice. And I don't think it's right to try to be. I think we need to leave that up to him. And I'm sure there were times in Elijah's life and his ministry where he called out to God and he didn't hear God answering him at all. Where he said, God, would you change this circumstance? Would you speed up? Let's end this drought sooner, right, God? Can we I want to be done with this. And God said either no or he was silent. But Elijah chose to sit and listen for God's voice. And the more you listen for God's voice, the more you hear God's voice. And this morning, I just want to invite you to listen. And he typically, he likes to speak in a lot of different ways. There's one that we kind of prefer, right? It's like, God, I want to hear you and know that it's you without any shadow of a doubt. That's the fun one, right? That's the one that we really love. And he did that for Elijah. But there's other ways that God speaks too. He speaks through droughts. He speaks through thunder and lightning in the story, right? He speaks through people around us. That's how he spoke to Ahab and Jezebel. He sent someone to confront them. Like, God, I'm speaking to you right now. You need to deal with this thing in your lives and in this nation, right? Your policies are wrong. You're not doing a good job. And I've noticed in my life, sometimes he speaks through the songs that we sing in church. He says the things that I need to hear if I'm paying attention and I'm listening and I'm ready to hear. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to just enter into a short time of worship, of quiet and contemplation. And I'm going to open up the altars to you. If you want to come up and pray, you can. And if you're an elder or a leader in the church and you feel God speaking like, hey, I want to go and pray for this person. If you're a member of this church and you've been here for a long time and you're confident that you can hear the voice of God and speak it to other people, we're going to give you permission to come and pray with people. So Bethel Christian Fellowship, would you go and listen for the voice of God as it leads you? If you're in the wilderness, would you listen? If you're on the mountaintop, would you listen? If you are disappointed, would you listen? And would you just surrender to whatever it is he has for you? Because in your disappointment, he's still good. In your joy, he's really good, and it's really easy to see it. would you persevere through times of hardship, ready to receive whatever he has to give you. You're welcome to stay and worship. You're dismissed.